Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversation in the Neighborhood final final conversation, final discussion. So my name is Alexandra Sinaitis, and I am the Assistant Director for Programming and Public Engagement at the UF Center for Humanities and the Public Sphere. It is an honor to welcome every one of you to Conversation Neighborhood, a public humanities series that addressed questions raised by food consumption and production at a moment in which a global pandemic challenges our physical and social connection. Today, we celebrate the beginning of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, right? So, in today's discussion, we choose to examine the possibilities and challenges of maintaining a sense of culture and home in Gainesville and beyond. So, today we definitely traveling, even though we are here virtually, we're traveling and we're actually going to Asia today. And with the escalation of hate crimes against Asian Americans, this type of conversation are very important. Before to get started, I would like to thank our moderator, and I also would like to thank our panelists for agreeing to be speakers for this particular kind of conversation. So I will start first with thanking Dr. Cindy Ching, Minji Kang, Adita Ria, and Viana Squash for agreeing to share with us their food memories and also their favorite recipes. I would like to thank the center staff, Barbara Meno, Sophia Akerd, Kristen Galvin, and Lauren Cox. I would like to thank my collaborators, Tanisha Marshall and Lisa Redmond from the Office of Equity and Inclusion in the City of Gainesville, Annual from the City of Gainesville, Melissa Dessa from Working Food, Manuela Calisi Nonga, Imani Stelvin, Angie Todd, Amobi Amanambu, Diamond from Geo Studios, and Chris Torres. I would also like to thank the Florida's Humanities Council, which provided funding for this program through a grant with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. I would like to say that any views, finding, conclusion, or recommendation expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Florida Humanities Council or the National Endowment for Humanities. I would like to thank our sponsors, the Chief Diversity Officer, the UF Center for Gender, Sexualities, and Women's Studies Research, the UF Department of Spanish and Portuguese Studies, the UF Center for American Studies, the UF Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, the UF Gender for African Studies, Center for African Studies, the UF African American Studies Program, the UF Languages, Literature, and Culture, the UF Center for European Studies, the UF International Center, the UF Center for Arts, Migration, and Entrepreneurship, and the UF Office of Sustainability. So just a little housekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. I will bring them up during the webinar and we'll have time for questions at the end. Now, without further ado, I will turn the time over to Dr. Cindy Ching, an assistant professor in modern Asian history at the University of Florida and specializes in migration, gender, and sexuality in Southeast Asia and the British Empire. Her scholarly areas of interest also include global China, inter-Asian connection, modern border regimes, women's history, and global empires / comparative colonialism. She's currently working on a book project that traces the border crossing journeys of over 1 million Chinese women who travel as wives, domestic servant, and sex workers to British Malaya in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Her research has been supported by the American Council of Learned Societies, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Before coming to Gainesville, she received her PhD in history at the University of Texas at Austin. Her favorite dishes include Taiwanese beef noodles soup, laksa, and roti canai. I hope I said it right. And now it's to you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for that really warm introduction. And of course, to the UF Humanities Center for organizing this event. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I want to now introduce our amazing panelists and fellow food enthusiasts that are with us today. So first off, we have Vienna Quach, who is a first-year student at the University of Florida. She's pursuing a biology degree and a pre-professional track with an English minor. She was born in Orlando, Florida, to Vietnamese immigrant parents. Our second panelist is Adita Riha. Adita is a 24-year-old Bangladeshi American born and raised in Orlando, Florida. She graduated from the University of Florida in 2018 with a bachelor's degree in family, youth, and community sciences. She has worked with PACE Center at Alachua Children's Home Society of Central Florida, and she currently does freelance nonprofit work with starter-up nonprofits in the region of Orlando, where she does graphic designs for flyers, produces short videos, postcards, and even decorates graduation caps. And finally, our last panelist is Minji Kang, who is a PhD candidate in English at the University of Florida. Her research interests are in race and gender studies, and her doctoral project focuses on depictions of slavery and resistance in contemporary culture through novels and museums. Minji has spent her childhood in South Korea before coming to the US and has kept her connection to her roots through cooking and eating Korean food. She currently runs a fabulous food blog called Community Foodways. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I highly encourage it. And in the blog, she captures stories of culture and care behind local restaurants for local and international audiences. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I want to kick off our conversation with a first question. So recently, I was listening to the Vietnamese American poet and writer Ocean Vuong speaking about culture and language, in which he says a lot of love is communicated in Vietnamese culture through service. We cook, we massage, we scratch each other's back. And I think that this really resonated with me, and I know so many Asian and Asian American households where food is a primary love language. So I wanted to ask the fellow panelists, what is your relationship between the food you eat and consume and your identity? I will turn it over to perhaps Fiona first can get us started.
Sure. Vietnamese food is definitely a way for me to connect with my heritage. My parents immigrated from Vietnam and I grew up in Orlando, Florida, so food was the primary way for me to appreciate that culture. In a lot of ways, I felt distance from Vietnamese culture since I speak English at home and I've never been to Vietnam. But whenever I'm at my grandparents' house and my grandma makes bún bò Huế, which is spicy noodle soup, and I'm surrounded by my family and we're like laughing and telling stories in Vietnamese, I feel the most connected to my culture.
Thanks so much, Fiona. Adita.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So food is again a way to connect with my family and my heritage. Unfortunately, both my parents were deported in the last 3 years, so food is definitely a way for me to stay connected to my parents when I miss them. So growing up, like although I was born in America, never been to Bangladesh either, still haven't, and the plan is to go this December. So fingers crossed. But like, food was always a way for us to kind of connect and bond over. It would be multiple families in one house and we all bring a dish and just kind of like, I would say break rice, not bread. We don't really eat bread like that. Rice is the way. But, just having that. And ever since I left, I've been trying to get more connected, trying to learn how to make our dishes more. Not that my mom's not here. And I'm kind of upset that I was like, why didn't you leave me a recipe book? That sort of thing. But she was like, you know what, figure out yourself. Because I had to do the same thing when I moved to America. Because, when she grew up, she didn't really have to be in the kitchen like that. They had servants in their household because she lived in the city. So they had that type of service in their house. So when she moved to America and lived with my dad taught her how to cook and she found her spin on it. And then she learned how to cook better than him. And that's what she was kind of, telling me to do the same thing, like figure out the basic recipe and then put your twist to it and make it your own.
Yeah, I can definitely echo my fellow panelists and say that food definitely connects me to my culture. I was born in South Korea, but then I came here to America, here because I'm currently in South Korea, but to America when I was 2 years old. I went back to Korea from the ages 10 to 15, and then I came to America and kind of stayed on ever since. And so whenever I, missed Korea, and even after my parents who left to Korea for their jobs, yeah, luckily, I was left a recipe book, and so I was able to kind of recreate and cook some dishes um, that my mother, always cooked. And so I feel really lucky that I was able to have that connection. And yeah, I'll talk about some various dishes that I just really connect with. But one of them is doenjang jjigae, which is a soybean paste soup. And I just connect with that so much because whenever I used to get sick, my mother used to make that for me with some steamed rice. So yeah, I think that even just eating that food, like whenever I'm sick, I think of that and I cook it sometimes when I can, and it just connects me back to that culture and care that I received from my parents. So
Thank you so much for those wonderful answers. And I think what our fellow panelists are really underscoring is that food is so intimately tied to the cultural identity, but also the sense of familial bond, right? That in so many Asian families that I know, instead of "I love you," the most common way to ask or to convey messages of affection is "Are you hungry?" And then proceed to feed you. But also, I think what many of you have highlighted is the discrepancy of food knowledge and food practices between first and second generation immigrants, right? So I'm wondering, can you and do you cook food often from either your country of origin, for Minji, South Korea, or your parents' countries of origin? And to think about the ways that migration and access to ingredients in Florida have shaped your own cooking practices. Let's start with you, Viana.
So every time I come back to Orlando, my dad tries to teach me a little bit more about cooking Vietnamese food. But a lot of the dishes are pretty intricate, like they require lots of different spices and ingredients and leafy greens that you can only find at an Asian market, really. And they have long cooking times and require a lot of space that I can't really afford in my little Gainesville apartment. But I'll try to make simpler dishes like fried rice with ingredients I can find at Publix. So it'll just be like eggs and vegetables and anything I can't find at Publix, I'll bring up from home. And I'll just have like a huge container of rice, like dried rice in my closet or something that I can use for that. And I just finished my first year at UF, so I've only lived in Gainesville a little while. So I definitely have a little bit more time to explore the different markets a little bit more and experiment with more recipes while I'm there.
I would say for myself, ever since my parents have been deported, because I was blessed to have a mother at home all the time and just be available to food on the table already for me. So I didn't have much learning to do. Like I'd ask her and I'm like, hey, can you like teach me? And she'd be like, yeah, yeah, but like never happened. But with COVID happening, like since everything's have been, been going technological, I asked my mom, I was like, I know you guys are kind of stuck at home too. And like I kind of miss eating y'all food. I could ask like certain relatives in the area, but I was like, Mom, none of them cook as well as you do. So I don't even want to ask them for food at all. And the closest thing I do to like even, get the food is like go to nearby Indian restaurants. Which is close and similar to our foods as well, like very similar. And typically Indian restaurants are owned by Bangladeshi people, surprisingly. So that it just kind of makes sense for me to go there anyways and get food from them. But I did ask my mom, like I'll call her, like, WhatsApp her and I'd be like, hey mom, like how do I do this? Or, how can I do this? Will you be on the video call with me when I make it and stuff like that? I had some of those moments when I was a student at UF2 when she was around and I would call her, I'd be like, hey, am I doing this correctly? Type thing.
So that's been very nice. So one of my goals this year actually is to at least learn how to make 3 dishes from my culture. So I did already try to make one, which is my favorite dish ever, which is biryani. So I'm glad to share that with you all today. I kind of failed when I did make it. I like used too much food coloring at the wrong time, and then my rice turned out pink instead of like little specks and whatever. And I was like, no, but it tastes good though, so that's okay. But yeah.
Yeah, I learned to cook, several dishes. I would say, like, especially after my parents left, because I was really missing their cooking and everything. But it is not easy, like, for sure. It's not easy to cook, especially as well as you're used to your parents cooking. So I definitely had lots of fails, and I think I have a PowerPoint slide of some YouTubers that I used to learn from as well, because yeah, nowadays there's a lot of just YouTube channels that we're fortunate to have, to really follow along with, and some of and Aries Kitchen, some really great YouTubers there. And in terms of ingredients, I find myself lucky, I think, in Gainesville to have like Ching Market and the Oriental Food Market on Archer, to find some ingredients. And even at Publix, like now that Asian food is considered, trendy and popular, you can find gochujang, like spicy red pepper paste at Publix now, and even kimchi. So I feel like there's a shift that has been going on, and I hope that more ingredients will become available to us widely. And yeah, I think that I suggested like kimchi as one of the prime dishes that I cook with, because it is pretty readily available here.
Oh, I meant to chime in too about the whole access to things. Luckily in Gainesville, I have that Indian supermarket there on or near Archer, and the Indian restaurant there, so that was pretty convenient. But like in Orlando, there's several like Indo-Pakistani like grocery stores readily available to us. So they're typically on the same road on like Orange Blossom Trail in Orlando, and they're like all on there. So it's not hard to find, Indian grocery stores and stuff and whatever you need. And sometimes we also go to like the Oriental markets where we can't find, like, well, we'll go somewhere else, like on West Colonial, that sort of thing. So it's been nice. I'm glad that, markets are easily available. And even like you said, when you go to like places like Publix, like they started making those, international like aisles and stuff. So that's kind of helpful to even find some of your items on the shelf.
Yeah, thanks for that. Minji, I also shop at Chongqing Market a lot. And Adita, I just wanted to follow up and say that I think virtual cooking during the pandemic has really become very popular. And I myself do a lot of cook-alongs with friends, trying different recipes. So before we get into the individual recipes that you've selected, I actually wanted to circle back to this question of thinking about the biggest challenge you face in recreating some of these recipes that have been handed down to you. And if you can provide us with one example in terms of how you adapt to perhaps the limitations or the shortages of these challenges, that would be great. Deanna, I'll start with you again. Thanks.
So I would probably, well, I can't cook too much Vietnamese food, I'd say. And whenever I ask my parents for recipes, they're always cooking like by eyeing food. So they're never gonna give me a recipe, I don't think. They're always saying like, if you know how to cook, you just do it. So, but that's probably the main challenge, just not having a recipe to go off from. And so when I do learn to cook at home, that's just something I'll have to watch and learn to do. As for adapting, I would say that I haven't had too much of a struggle finding ingredients like in Orlando, since I spent most of my time here. But in Gainesville, I haven't had too much time exploring the markets. But like you guys said, I'm sure there's some Asian markets that I can look around for other foods at. I've been able to find substitutes at Publix. Like there's some leafy greens that are specific to Vietnamese dishes. like mince and stuff, but I'll just find the American version of that and I'll use that instead. So it's not the same, but it's what I'll do to try to recreate those dishes.
And I'd say for Bangladeshi dishes, our cooking is very complex and there's several spices that go into our food. It's not like 1, 2, or 5, it's like 10 of them or like 15 of them. And I guess when they use our spices, they use a raw spice. So like here in American dishes, we'll use black pepper, but in our culture, they'll put the actual pepper, like corns in there, or like use like, I forget, it looks like a screwdriver to me, but but like it's these spices that they be throwing in their food. And it's hard for me to kind of figure out, like they'll say the spices in their language, and it's hard for me to figure that out sometimes because I like know them in English, and then I'll have to go look it up and stuff like that. And so for me to make the dishes with the raw spices, it takes time. And living in America where everything's fast paced, you don't always have time to make dishes and put in that, you know, all that love and passion that our parents did. So for me, I take like the semi homemade route. So like I'll go to the Indian store and they'll have like already grounded up spices that you need for that particular meal in a box already. So it makes my life a bit easier to still get that taste, but to make my life easier with the time that I do have available for me. So that's how I kind of, you know, adjust with those type of situations, or I'll just ask for like relatives to make me food and keep it moving.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with, making use of whatever you have and whatever limited time you have, because yeah, it's just impossible to find, especially some ingredients that are required in Korean cooking. Like, especially one of the dishes I really enjoy is boga, which is fish, and a lot of dishes like in Daegu where I'm from, like you marinate that puffer fish and you can serve it with soup or you can serve it stir fried, but it's also highly poisonous. So I I don't recommend, trying probably. So with ingredients and Korean blood sausage, it's called, which is made out of pig intestines. Um, there's a version that you can actually find in the Korean market in Gainesville, but it just doesn't have the same texture or feel to it. So with those kind of like rare ingredients like that, I just kind of throw in whatever worked, like Adita were saying, and yeah, I just use, instead of the puffer fish, I might use tilapia or any kind of like other fish that you can find, and just recreate the marinade or base, and just really do have, because I think part of the fun of cooking is that be versatile and that you can get creative with it. So, yeah, I find that challenging, but also like as a fun way to do something.
And I was gonna chime in, and like I know with like, you know, Indians are known for curry, I guess. And just like I would say how my parents even kind of, we grew up in West Orlando, which is basically Caribbean too. So we were exposed to a lot of Caribbean culture as well. So like I asked my dad, like I called him one day, I was like, how do you make your curry? And he's like, use the Indian curry and then go to the Jamaican store and find Jamaican curry, put it together, and then you got really good curry. And I was just like, you actually use Jamaican curry? He's like, yeah, that gives it a little razzle dazzle in the food type thing. So that's kind of cool. And it works out because like my boyfriend's Jamaican, so I get to merge both cultures because they do have some Indo, you know, influence in their culture as well. So it's nice to integrate those and then recreate something, you know, based off like your own journey and like what you're going through, and for your taste palette, and you know, you just kind of create something. And I love the diversity that, you know, we have exposed here in America to be able to do those type of things.
Um, these are such fascinating responses and really creative adaptations, right? And Adita, I think I really loved your point that you mentioned earlier of translating, or the difficulty of translating recipes from one language or an ingredient from one language to the next. And I think it also really highlights and underscores that children of immigrants are really language and cultural brokers. And I think that this is so this is so much the case when you're cooking and adapting dishes. So with that being said, I know all of you selected a dish to feature in this conversation. I've had a preview of them and I can't wait to try some of them myself. So I wanted to see if you could describe this dish for us, and maybe walk us through the various ingredients and why you've chosen this particular dish to feature today. Deanna, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So I chose goi guong, which means it's rolls. So it's Vietnamese spring rolls. They're pretty common. You can find them as appetizers at basically any Vietnamese restaurant. It's gonna be a rice paper wrap outside with pork, shrimp, and vegetables and noodles on the inside. It's pretty easy to make and it's very versatile. So you can like remove the meat if you're vegetarian, or switch out the vegetables if you want. And it's just overall very like refreshing and a light meal. It has kind of a special place in my heart because whenever my parents prepared this meal, they would lay out all the ingredients on the table. So we'd have like a bowl of vegetables on one side, like a plate of meat, and a bowl of hot water where we could dip our each individual rice papers and put it on our plate. And we kind of just almost like customize our own dinner. And so a lot of times my parents would work and my sisters and I would have schoolwork, so we'd find ourselves eating separately. But this was one of the only dishes where we'd have to all kind of sit together at the table and make our own food. We'd just talk about our day and just overall just have a good time.
Am I next?
Yes, if you want
All
to
right.
be. Thanks, Adita.
Yeah, so my favorite dish is biryani, and it's basically a mixture of rice, meat, lots of seasonings, lots and lots of it. And then you could, like you said, add in vegetables, take out stuff if you want, opt different meats. I'm actually glad that I did the Zoom call because I did actually look up where our food was originated from, like where it really came from. And this actually originated from Persia. So we actually got Persia influence coming into India during colonialism and whatnot. And when the empires were like super heavy in India, so the Mughal Empire, I guess, did whatever with Persia and then brought along this dish to actually feed the army. So they thought it was easy to do like a one pot type meal to feed the army. So they got a lot of those ideas from Persia, put it all together. So the original biryani actually starts with like lamb and stuff or goat. And then, but like, as things changed and, things evolve on your land, you may not have access to the same animals or the cases. So I know personally me, I like chicken biryani a lot. I'm not a big lamb or goat fan at all. So it's either beef or chicken for me, or just vegetables too. I love having vegetables in my biryani. I just like that there's so much flavor, and everybody that I do come across kind of makes their own version. Like they make it, like I said, to their taste palette. So there's a base, but everybody, like I said, just changes it to what they want. And it typically there's like condiments that come with it. So you could put like raita, which is like a yogurt type condiment that you kind of put on your rice, because the rice is so spicy. It's nice that you have like the little raita on it, so it cools down the spice that you have. We usually typically eat this like on like big events like weddings and like birthdays and whatever the case is. That's when it's typically presented. So like for us, it's like, oh, there's a wedding, like there's gonna be biryani, like I'm gonna go there because it's so good, that sort of thing. Because it's not often that your mom wants to make biryani at home because it's not a special occasion. It's like typically like, white rice and whatever else that you eat at home. So like this is a specialty dish and it tastes really good. So for me, it always holds good memories and of like different events and special occasions. So it's just a nice way to, for all of us to come together and celebrate, was always over food.
Yeah, and the dish that I chose is kimchi jjigae or kimchi stew. And I chose this because kimchi is really a staple of Korean cuisine. And it's made out of napa cabbage usually, and marinated in this really spicy pepper, Korean pepper paste seasoning. And you will find this probably in every Korean household. It's known to be very pungent and smells. A lot of people, might not like that. but give it a try, and I feel like it's pretty addicting out for me. And also, I found out actually that a lot of healthy bacteria like lactose that it contains. So it's a probiotic food, so it's good for you. Um, and it doesn't it's supposed to be fermented, so it doesn't necessarily spoil in the same way that other foods do. So if you just buy a pot of kimchi, then you can probably use it for months, not years. So it's something that's really sustainable, I feel like. It's really um, you know it, it makes sense to use like for any occasion. And so it's I think kimchi jjigae is something that is so versatile that you can really just put in any ingredient really. And I just used pork belly as my protein. That just contains the perfect mix of the fat. You get like the rich meat as well. And the kimchi you can find at I know Suki's, which is a local store, like a food truck, also sells kimchi as well. And you can use like all these spices and veggies that you would probably find at your local store. And then you just really fry it up, throw it all together, and it tastes really great, especially for like a cold day, because it's this really warm soup that is like filling your soul almost. So I hope all of you can enjoy as well.
Minji, I love kimchi jjigae even on a hot day. But I think that what all these dishes really, as I'm listening to you all talk about it, it's how versatile and adaptable they are, right? Whether we're talking about Vietnamese spring rolls or biryani or kimchi jjigae, it's a base in which you can add or take away things and experiment. Um, Minji, I know you've also had some slides of the kimchi jjigae and various foods from Korea that you wanted to talk to us through. Do you want to do that now?
Sure, yeah. So I'll go through the slides just really quickly, just to give you some visuals of what the food looks like that I'm talking about. So the doenjang jjigae that I mentioned that my mother used to cook for me whenever I'm sick is on the right. And then tteokbokki, which is a spicy rice cake, is a street food that I can talk more about later. And you can just flip to the next slide here. And then this is the puffer fish and the sundae that I was talking about, as well as some YouTube channels that I would follow. And this is just a picture of the kimchi jjigae that I made for this recipe and shared. And then if you flip through to the next slide, um, I wanted to explain how kimchi originated. So it was usually stored in these stone earthen pots back when there weren't any refrigerators, and then you would bury it in the ground. And usually you make kimchi out of cabbage that's from the fall. Get in the fall time and just eat that. Usually would last till the spring. Here. And then now a lot of Koreans in Korea have specific refrigerators for the kimchi, so you can actually store the kimchi. It controls like the temperature so that it's the exact way that you want it to. So you can select. Since we don't have a lot of kimchi here, I think kimchi jjigae is recipe because it calls for fermented kimchi. So the more older your kimchi is, and that's good because kimchi usually ferments within a week or so. Yeah. Yeah,
Thank you
and
so
I can
much,
probably
Minji.
explain the more of the slides in the later.
Okay, great. So as a historian, I have to ask this is, what do you think is the historical connection between the food of your country of origin or your parents' country of origin and the history of the US? Viana, I'm gonna ask you to go ahead. Thanks.
Sure. So both of my parents are from South Vietnam. So I'm not as familiar with the food from North or Central Vietnam. I know Central Vietnam definitely has spicier flavors. So a dish such as bún bò Huế, which is going to be like spicy noodle soup, is going to originate from there. Southern Vietnam, which is where my family's from, we cook with sweeter flavors like coconut, and we'll make like coconut shrimp, or there's coconut like sea snails sometimes. I'm probably the least familiar with food specifically from the north region of Vietnam, but I know that there are common dishes such as pho that can be found across like all of Vietnam, and it'll just like slightly change the flavor profile throughout the different regions. I know the war definitely might have mixed some things up in Vietnam, but my parents definitely distanced themselves from Vietnam after the war, so they haven't really connected or gone back to see how things have changed since they lived there after.
Just to clarify, what were you asking? Oh, I can't hear you, Sandy.
Yeah, sorry, I just realized a year of teaching on Zoom, and sometimes I still forget to unmute myself. Um, I was asking about the historical connections between the food from your parents' country of origin, and of this country, um, whether through migration, whether through war, whether through U.S. military presence.
Got you. Okay. So I think I touched a little bit on that earlier. Like I said, where we got Persian influence during, like the Mughal Empire time and how they were trading and whatnot. So I actually did find out like the word biryan means fried before cooking, which is a way to cook the food, like a way to prepare, which is how they do make the food. Like you fry the rice with the spices, like or certain spices over the stove, like the rice and whatnot, and then you like cook it with the meat and stuff at some point. So it was just nice to know that that word originated from Persia. I didn't know that before, but when I finally looked it up, it was really nice to see that that we do have influence. So it's like from Persia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Burma, we all have connections over the same type of food. So we all have variations of the same food item. So it's cool to see that and how we all have our own way of making it. Like I said, depending on what your country's land has to offer in terms of like spices and whatnot, everyone's flavors are a little bit different for that particular reason. Like I know when I have Indian, biryani, theirs tastes a bit different than a Bangladeshi biryani versus a Pakistani biryani. They all look the same, but they all taste a little bit different. But like we all typically eat the same foods, just prepare it just a little bit different. So it's just nice to know that like, if I can't find it, in my area, like I can go somewhere else to get the same food, and just have like a little flavor difference. So that's been nice just to know where it came from. I didn't know that before. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like how you're talking about the variations, even with find that with Korean cuisine as well, because have some similar things to like for example we have jjajangmyeon, which is a black bean paste noodle, and I know that there's a version of jjajangmyeon with Chinese culture as well, but the taste is really quite different. So I feel like Koreans really kind of like to adapt and really make it taste appealing to Korean, and so the jjajangmyeon is a sweeter, savory, and it still has that black bean paste taste to it, but they've just adapted it to a more mainstream Korean. And with kimbap, which is a Korean sushi roll, as they say, they don't use raw fish when they use sushi, but they use fish cake, like fried fish cake and vegetables. You can commonly find in Korea. So I feel like there is adaptations that happen, and it's cool how evolutions of food occur with migration and within Korea, even there's a lot of variety with food, like kimchi that I was discussing there. The kimchi from the northern regions is actually a little bit milder, as they say, than those of the south, because since the climate of the southern region is a lot hotter, the kimchi tends to be a little saltier to preserve better. And there's just so many different kimchi too, depending on available in that particular region and during that season. So there's just a lot of variety that happened. I also want to touch a little bit about the occupation that happened and U.S. In South Korea. So after the Korean War, when there were a lot of military bases in the Korean border, especially that region, there's a dish that developed called budae, and that's basically called military army. And it's made of various kinds of meat that were found in the military bases. So like spam and Vienna sausages, like those weren't things that you would commonly find in Korea. And it wasn't until the military presence that people could get that from the military bases. And so you throw that together along with kimchi, and you have food. It's like this of U.S. and Korean influence.
Oh, I was gonna say I just like peeked back at my article. So you all are I guess familiar with the Taj Mahal, right? So I guess the queen that was living in there, she's the one who concocted the biryani in India. And it was the one that fed it to the army. And like you said, similar, we had the earthen pot too, and we actually put the meat in the rice and everything and dug it inside. And then, when it was, they dug it back up, and then there you go, biryani happened. And then that's what they fed the army to make sure, they were nourished and can keep fighting wars and, whatnot at the time. So it's cool. But I think it's really cool, even just knowing that we're all on the same continent. And, there's so many differences just from your foods and mine too, all because of how, historically how everything happens and how we were influenced through like trade and like colonialism and empiricism. Like it's so cool to see all of that. And we're all in technically the same area. Like I know Bangladesh is not too far off from like, Vietnam or whatever the case is. Like we're like kind of nearby each other, but have so many differences all at the same time. And it kind of reminds me of my uncle too. He's like Bengali, but like, he moved to Japan and owns a restaurant there with his Japanese wife, and they have kids together. But like, he kind of emerged both cultures together and, made something of their own, even in Japan. So that was really cool too, just to know that we're all nearby, but, have so many differences and so many ways to, have culture ingrained in us.
So we have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to encourage you all to ask questions, either in the chat box or I think with the raise hand if you have any. But in the meantime, I actually wanted to follow up on, Minji, you provided this really beautiful and eloquent history of the budae jjigae, this collision of cultures, as you called it, really something similar to the kimchi jjigae, but with spam, right? And canned meat. And I think that it's just so indicative of how each dish that we taste is really a reflection of the distinctive history and the historical forces that brought it to its creation. So in my course, I teach a course called Global Asia, and we watch a documentary called In Search of General Tso, which looks at the history of this dish and the confluence of China, Taiwan, and U.S. Connections. And that the famous Chinese restaurant dish, General Tso's chicken, is actually an invention of the U.S., right? And I think that so many of us can think about what we think of as Vietnamese or Korean or Indian food is in restaurants is actually an Americanized version of these dishes, whether we're talking about butter chicken or something else. So I wanted to see if any of you could speak about the distinctions between the food that you eat in a restaurant and the food that you make at home. I will just share that, when I immigrated to Canada, I had sweet and sour chicken or sweet and sour pork for the first time, and it was such a revelation. And it's such an iconic dish, right? That's associated with Chinese food. But the first time I've had it was actually in North America. So I'll go back to you, Viana, if you wanted to share.
Sure, I would say that Vietnamese restaurants, they would have um, the pretty similar food if we're talking about pho or like other noodle soups. Their menus though are probably they have like hundreds. If you see it's like 1A, 2A, and then it goes like all the way down to hundreds. And I would say I go there and I discover more Vietnamese food than what my parents focus on. Like my grandparents and my parents will only cook the same few meals that they remember that they took from Vietnam. And so whenever I go to Vietnamese restaurants, it's definitely a new experience every time. I wouldn't say it's constructed from being in America. I would say that it's just so much more diversity coming from different regions of Vietnam as well. But I always say that home cooked is going to be better, and I think anyone would agree about that. It's just that they've been cooking the same way, at least my grandmother has, for decades. So she's kind of perfected her recipes, and I've just never found that it could compare to anything I've ever eaten in a restaurant. So I won't usually go to the restaurants first. But whenever I'm homesick in Gainesville and I need like some soup or something, I'll definitely go out and look for a Vietnamese restaurant.
And I'd say for myself, the difference between whatever's being cooked at home and then the restaurant is our home meals are way different than what's at the restaurant. So like I said, like when we're going to the restaurant, you'll find those meals that you find on your special occasions in your home at the restaurant. So it's readily available all the time to eat if you want. If you're like, oh man, it was birthdays today or like a wedding, that's no problem. I'll just go to the Indian restaurant and get whatever I want. That sort of thing. Because typically at home, what we're eating is like I said, plain rice, lentil, that we just kind of put over our food, chicken curry everything, fish. Like we have different items that go with your plain white rice to make it taste good, and that's our home meal that you see on a daily basis, versus like I said, the biryani and whatever, like butter chicken, all those things, those are delicacies, so you only find them on special occasions. But when you go to an Indian restaurant, you'll always find them there available, versus you won't find any home cooked meal type meals at the restaurant, and you'll always find that at home. So I do appreciate the fact that if I can't find that nice delicacy at home, it's no problem, we'll just go eat it there, that sort of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I also echo what Viana and Adita were both saying about the variety that's available in restaurants. And I feel like in Gainesville, with Korean restaurants we have like Momoyaki, Holic, Garlic and Ginger, there's an incredible amount of variety that you can choose from. And there's so dishes that are hard to make at home are so readily available. But also restaurant eating, I feel like, is a different kind of experience. So a lot of Korean restaurant eating is about getting together with people and kind of sharing this communal meal. And so you even see that with things like banchan, which is side dishes that you get at a Korean restaurant. And these are completely free, like it just comes with your meal, and you just share that along with the main meal. And with a place like BQ Holic in Gainesville, it's a Korean barbecue restaurant. And a lot of people in America might find it kind of weird, like, oh, you're cooking your own meat basically, and you're having to do this extra labor. But in Korea, you find a lot of these Korean barbecue restaurants where part of the experience of eating together is about cooking that meat together and sharing that and having that experience and that community. So I feel like you get that with the Korean restaurants. Like you can take anyone there from any culture and really share this common experience and this meal. As for cooking at home, I feel like it creates a more intimate experience. So it's not about really like performing or having a certain kind of experience with people, but it's about making dishes with what you have and recreating your childhood memory. And so it's this more kind of intimate experience that you get with home.
And I was going to say with restaurants too, like obviously when you're home, it takes time to make that meal. When you go to a restaurant, things are more like like the ingredients are already kind of there to make it happen quickly. So like you can taste the difference between something that is home cooked and then something that is made from the restaurant because of the flavors and how quick it was to make that dish or lack of, or whatever the case is. So like you can always, sense those flavors just, from home and, the restaurant.
So we have a couple of questions from audience members, and this is a fantastic question that I've been really thinking about as well. Um, a question, audience member is asking, as some foods become more quote unquote trendy and more available, are there any concerns about it becoming too expensive and thus less accessible, right? I think Minji, you're talking about, fermented kimchi now being marketed as a health food with probiotics. And I know I grew up drinking like spare rib soup, and all of a sudden it's, sold for $8 at Whole Foods as bone broth. So the question is, what can we do to both celebrate these foods and cultures and also keep them accessible for the people whose cultures they're from? And then this audience member says, related to trendiness, for those who grew up in the US, in your experiences, how have things changed from the days of your childhood? I guess this is a two-part question. One concerning the gentrification of the city and the inaccessibility of the food, and then two, related to your own personal history of how you've seen the evolution of perhaps your heritage cuisine change over time throughout your lives. So we don't have to do it in the order that we've been answering them in. Whoever wants to jump in and think about that, that might be great.
I can jump in. I would say in my childhood, with everything, I think there's more awareness now culturally for everybody currently versus when I was a kid. Like I said, now we have international aisles in, American grocery stores versus you always had to go to your culture's grocery store and, that's where you had to find your things. So it's just nice to see that we have those options, but also like now there's frozen foods available in our cultures. Like whenever I go to like Publix or Walmart, I actually see like chicken tikka masala in like whatever, frozen, packages and stuff. So it's nice that our culture is being more exposed to Americans or other cultures in that fashion. So it's nice to see that, but it's still kind of like, yeah, but it's not the same thing. Like it's not the traditional food at the end of the day. Like it's not going to hit the same way. It's not going to taste the same at the end of the day. So that's how I kind of see it. But like I said, I guess it's like a pro and con type situation. It's like pro is you're being exposed, and the con is it's still not the authentic dish.
Yeah, I'd have to say I agree. I think by trendy food, I see a lot of pho or like spring rolls and stuff in Asian fusion restaurants. So they don't just choose one culture. They just kind of do their own spin on whatever you have. And I think they'll do like smaller portions for like much more expensive. So I definitely do see that in like other more modern restaurants, especially versus when like you have a family owned restaurant and you get a huge bowl of pho for like, I don't know, $8. So there's definitely a difference there, and I do see different Vietnamese foods pop up in like the frozen sections, like Adita said, in different grocery stores. I think you people need to realize that like it's not going to be exactly the same whatever you find in the grocery stores or at those fusion restaurants, and you kind of have to go back to those like family owned restaurants to get the real culture that you'll find somewhere in like Vietnam.
Yeah, I would also echo what both Adita and Diana were saying. There's a lot more frozen, bibimbap and yeah, more dishes available in like Trader Joe's, let's say. But those dishes are just really different from what you would find at home. But I think it can be a good kind of gateway for someone who doesn't know anything about Korean food or different cultural foods, and they just want to give it a try. As long as they realize that, okay, like this is not the cultural food like as a whole, and as long as they realize that there is some kind of like difference between like a home cooked or a restaurant made dish, and then like the recreation of that for a wide audience. But I feel like the refrigerated or the freezer section, or the grocery aisle, actually could increase accessibility because it's a lot cheaper, it's faster, and it's widespread. So in that way, like, it could increase the accessibility.
Thank you so much for that. And I think all of you touch on the importance of, supporting family-run grocery stores and restaurants that have been particularly hit hard during the pandemic. There are a couple of questions that we didn't get to because of time. I don't know, Alexandra, how you might want to handle this if the panelists want to stay on afterwards, but I want to actually turn it back to you for some closing comments and statements. I know that this conversation has been really fruitful for me. I've learned so much, and I've also gotten very hungry from all this talk about your dishes. Go ahead, Alexandra.
Yes, thank you so much, Cindy, for moderating this wonderful conversation, which was which was much needed. So yes, in terms of the question, unfortunately, sorry we couldn't get to them. So what we can actually do, we can definitely try to answer some of those questions or send them, especially in terms of the resources that we have, because we'll do like a follow-up email, and any questions or anything that was mentioned in the chat, we usually go back to them and pretty much comment and share those particular kind of resources as well. So I will say, in fall 2019, I would say I started thinking about creating a public humanities series, which will eventually come to fruition with the name of Conversation Neighborhood. The series premise was to tell food stories, which I think we did today, and we actually did. But that said, before we got to Conversation Neighborhood, which we are currently doing right now, I had to go back to the drawing board because of COVID, right? Because initially the conversation was supposed to be around different neighborhood. We'll go travel, go to different neighborhood. We'll try local food trucks. We will try locally owned restaurants. So we can actually highlight those kind of questions that we talk about, the gentrification of food, that those kind of like the topics as well. But despite this adjustment, I will say we were able to build a virtual community from fruit of the past, present, and future. People were able to learn, for instance, about their relationship with fruits, to food memories of Asia. We were able to learn about what it means to be second generation, what it means to try to maintain, to keep your culture, to keep your identity, especially in the US, and also what it means to connect with your parents, whether they are abroad or whether they are here with you, and to try to, I would say, to try to keep that history, the family recipe alive. So I think Conversation in Neighborhood really helped its participant, among other things, cross borders and ethnicities, but also learn about different food related topics, right? So we talk about, like we mentioned in that conversation, we talk about gentrification of food. We also talk about colonization of food. We talk about the diversity of that also happened, the creativity that emerged throughout different contacts as well. We talked about food access. So there are so many topics we were able to delve into as well. So I think as a takeaway for the series final conversation, I do have some suggestions. I would say support local Asian restaurants in Gainesville, in Minji's blog, right? Because she's giving us a guide. And I think those particular kind of guide are always needed so we can know how to navigate where to go and how we can also respect others' culture. If you are interested in the center's programming, I would say subscribe to our newsletter so you can actually learn more and also know about the next theme that we're gonna have for Conversation in Neighborhood. Also provide your feedback, right? So this is so you can keep us accountable. So I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing it for you. So if you have any ideas, any topics you feel like we should talk, we should cover, please let us know. I'm always happy. My door is always open to hear what people are saying. On that note, I would say I want to thank everyone for tuning here today. For joining us, especially on the Saturday. I also enjoyed the ways in which we were able to build connections and share our experiences. I also want to thank our moderator, Dr. Cindy Ching. I also want to thank our panelists today, Viana Quash, Adita Riha, and Minji Kang. And I also want to I want to thank our assistant today, Humanities Engagement Scholar, Alexander Kenfer. So on that note, thank you for coming in. And this is the end of Conversation in the Neighborhood. Bye. We'll wait a bit. Yes, and I will close.
Alexandra, did you want us to stay behind at all or no?
Yes, you can stay behind. Pretty much people are leaving right now.
There were some great questions at the end, but I guess they were sent a bit later, so we didn't have a lot of time to answer them.
Yeah, that's correct. So the questions, I think you pretty much answered most of the questions. Because I think the only one we had was like the difference between Asian food and stuff like that in terms of taste. I don't know if there's any article you can refer where we can talk about, tasting and stuff like that. And then you also have what is this like comment like family
to put a disclaimer.
disclaimer and stuff. But I think other than that, everything it's went well. Any other questions or anything that I didn't cover? Well, thank you.
Questions. Oh.
Go ahead.
No, I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. It was really fun to hear everyone talk and all of that.
Thank you. We were actually going to be having another series, I would say for fall. So this one will be around music. And pretty much is the same structure where we have 10 events. And among the 10 events, I usually reserve, I would say 4 events for people of color. So I tend to highlight Latinx, Native American, Asian, and Blacks, especially around that particular, around those particular topics. And then we have 6 events that pretty much delve into the question of music. So if you have anyone or anybody that does work on music, let me know. I'm looking for panelists because I try to make it very centered around students, graduate students, scholars, community members, and so on. So that's pretty much what we do.
Thank you so much for bringing us all together, and Sandy for moderating so smoothly.
Oh yes, you are like a pro. I mean, like, yes, Cindy is like the best.
I'm not a food historian, but I feel like teaching online for a year, it's almost like being a television host,
Yes, that's what I tell people.
There's a lot of practice. But I learned so much from all of you, and it was like such a fun conversation. I'm going to try and recreate the recipes you shared, so thank you for that. That was wonderful.
Yes, I'm gonna try to do them myself. I'm not probably gonna fail, but it's okay. I'm gonna try. That's how you learn how to cook. You're gonna try. So yeah, but thank you for coming in. I'll be in touch, especially in a couple of weeks, especially with you, Minji and Anna and Cindy. If you have any questions or anything, you can always let me know, and I'll be more than happy to assist you. And we should definitely see each other in person.
Yeah,
hopefully.
I was gonna recommend that because it's been a year of virtual, interaction. I'll email you when I'm back in Gainesville, and hopefully we can get coffee or something. That'd be
Yes,
great.
definitely. And because we can do
Yeah.
like a tour and try like Asian restaurants in Gainesville. I would love to do
Yes, let's do it. We could do it just, amongst all the panelists. That would be great.